Hey everyone, I'm Ganesh. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Cortex. We help organizations with service ownership, service reliability, scaffolding, and all kinds of different things that come as a result of microservices. So very excited to chat about service ownership, reliability, and all those things with some of our longtime customers here. So we have Jonathan and Mike here from Rappi and EquipmentShare respectively. If you guys want to introduce yourselves to the listeners, just what you guys do and where you work, so they know a little bit more about you.
Okay, my name is Jonathan. I'm a part of the architecture team in Rappi. I work in Rappi since like 4 years ago, 3.5. I went through different teams, starting from DevOps and SRE team and synthetic team, and now I'm a part of the architecture team, and we work pretty tight to the developer teams to standardize and raise the bar in terms of quality.
Thanks. Great to have you.
Hey, my name is Mike Clanahan. I'm the director of core engineering at EquipmentShare. Core engineering is basically anything that doesn't deliver products directly to customers, but though some of my customers are engineers by and large. Cloud ops, data ops, shared services, things like that. My background is software engineering as well, working on SaaS products mostly, and then landed EquipmentShare and moved into the ops space. And then from there, picked up a couple extra teams around data ops and shared services. So happy to be here as well.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining. And yeah, very excited to dive into some of the challenges and how you guys have been solving some of those issues. Just to set some context for listeners, we'd love to maybe just get some basics around the surface area of what you're dealing with. So they have some context. So approximately, ballpark, how many microservices / projects are you folks dealing with right now? Is it hundreds, thousands? What does that scale kind of look like?
So for EquipmentShare, we're actually at the very beginning of our microservices journey. We have followed the relatively traditional path of monolith as a startup. And then as the team got big, we had about 100 engineers. It started to become quite painful to make changes. Cross-team changes are impacting each other, things like that. And so we were sitting right around 24 microservices as we started to decompose our monolith. So we're fairly early on in our journey.
Yeah, we went into a pretty similar journey, and the numbers are pretty close to that. For Rappi, we have more than 2,000 services right now in production, and we have another verticals like Rappi Pay with different ecosystems. But in terms of the big numbers, that's the amount of services in production that we already have.
Cool. Yeah, my own personal background in a company called LendUp, I think we're probably closer to where EquipmentShare was. So I got to see that monolith to microservice migration, from that first service we pulled out around 100 services by the time it left. I think that's kind of what really taught me around those challenges around service ownership and how important it is to have accountable owners for things. And, you run into the risk of having orphan services where, nobody's accountable for them and, service quality starts to degrade. So yeah, I'm curious kind of, when did you really start thinking about service ownership? Was there a specific incident? Was it a number of, people in the organization? What was the driving force to even start thinking about service ownership?
So I think, and a lot of my stories will be couched in coming from an operations background where, we are early on in the maturity of our understanding and detecting issues within a system. And so we frequently find out things by high level metrics like, load balancer, 500 errors and things like that, right? And so having to walk from that all the way back to finding the service, finding out who owned it became incredibly painful very quickly, even early on in our journey. And so we looked for a way to, it started off just asking Slack, please, who owns the service? It's on fire, things are bad. And it's gotten better since then, but it's been nice to have a constantly updating, evolving directory of our service landscape.
I think in our case, the ownership requirement became obvious when we transitioned from the monolith to microservices, and the first thing that the first action item for that reliability plan was defining the service ownership and also the service criticality based on tires. And from that, we started thinking about a lot of initiatives related to reliability mostly, and with action item based on the tires, and also started working with a culture of postmortems, and there you really need ownership and tires.
Interesting. So like the ownership kind of came as a result of like, hey, something is going wrong, and who do we, obviously like a no blame culture, but like, which team was accountable for this? Where do we, who's going to kind of take charge of fixing it and driving that to the finish line? Is that kind of the right description?
Yeah, it's so for me at least.
Yeah. Mike, in your guys' case, I'm curious, like, with 24 microservices, I'm like, was it the number of people that, caused that challenge around like, hey, who owns this thing? Like, was it the number of engineers that was growing? Was it more around like the complexity of the infrastructure? Like, I guess, like, which was the main driver that caused that problem in your opinion?
So not that we were unique, but EquipmentShare has been remote since the start, about 6 years now. And that's produced kind of a interesting, highly self-sustaining, teams are self-sustaining, self-inclusive. And that's really great within the team level, but when you start to have to deal with things operationally or at a systems level, like these close-knit, isolated teams become really difficult to engage and understand and have full visibility into. So for us, it really grew out of probably mostly from organizational changes, concerns from our organizational structure, where these teams are building things totally independently, and that's great, and they're plugging them into a larger system, but without high cross-pollination, without a water cooler, for lack of a better metaphor, like it's hard to know who owns the dog food service, right? Like, oh, is that the dog team or is that the cat team? Like, that it was, for us, it's organizational more than any sort of technical complexity or anything like that.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think like there's the famous law, Conway's law, which basically says that organizations tend to design systems that reflect like the org structure as opposed to whatever domains there are. And so like one of my theories, like this whole microservices ownership challenge, is because naturally as a team grows, you end up breaking things down into teams, and those teams then build services and kind of draw their domains around that. And so then ownership becomes a challenge, because it's not just like it's kind of reflecting the challenges within the org and the growing number of people and the different communication lines across all of that. So I think like Conway's law very accurately depicts like the microservice ownership problem in some sense, which has been interesting to see. Kind of as a follow-up, like what does ownership actually mean at your organization? Like, is it like the first line of defense when something goes down? Is it people who are developing the service? Is it like the full life cycle? Is it an individual that owns a service? Is it a team? Like, what does service ownership actually mean?
In our case, the ownership is based on teams, and is a team owner of the service is responsible for the entire life cycle of the service, since the design, the development, and also maintaining the service, developing features or bugs or whatever, but also all the reliability related stuff that involves running a service in production. There's a lot of like recommendation or reliability patterns that you need to follow, like monitoring, alerting, APM, the dependency reliability patterns based on your tire, and a lot, and also when an issue comes into production, having a rotation, an on-call rotation available to attend that incident, and also being responsible and accountable for the action item that were identifying the postmortem.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So they're like actively on call, like they own the entire life cycle of that project. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so
is it similar at EquipmentShare, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. We break down service ownership by team as well. In the unfortunate case, we have a team of one or two. Sometimes that team ends up being a proxy for one person. But yeah, so for us, ownership is just like Rappi is development, ongoing love and care and feeding, and incident response. For us, the understated thing missing during like incident response, like, oh, it's a sub one, the database is on fire, the service is down. We have no great ways as a SaaS, with our SaaS product the way it is, we don't have ways to determine customer impact. And so teams often have some of that context localized. And that's a lot of what we're looking for from an ops perspective, is like the alarms and our metrics say this is wrong, but how wrong really is it? We don't have full context. And so that's really what, like, ownership just of the code of the system health, but also the context around response and impact as well.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. Like at Cortex, we see a lot of very strong opinions about ownership, as you would guess, and we see folks who very strongly believe in team ownership, and some people believe in like individual owners, or like there's one accountable person. It's like tragedy commons type of a thing. I'm curious, like, was there a particular reason you went with like team ownership? Was it just because like the team is the one that's developing the software like as a whole, and then therefore they should all be owners? Or I'm curious, like, was there any particular reason that your orgs decided to go with team-based ownership in particular?
I think it's just longevity, health of the people on the teams as well as the teams themselves, right? Like there's huge benefit in even putting people that are, entry-level software engineers or mid-level software engineers, putting them into on-call rotations for critical services so that they get exposed to how to triage, how to fight fires, how to investigate. And by sharing the responsibility, it keeps one person from becoming like handcuffed to that service. Because I think we've probably all seen that there's some arcane graybeard who's built the original service that can never leave it because they're the only one that knows how to work it. We don't want that. Like, you want any engineer to move and work on whatever they want, and you don't want to, certainly don't have the lottery factor for any engineer either. So, for us, it's sharing that burden and sharing that call it an opportunity to learn when things have gone somewhat awry. That
makes sense. Yeah, I think lottery factor is the nicer way that I've heard it, but I usually hear the bus factor, which can be kind of dark when it comes to service ownership. I like the lottery factor. Yeah. Is it similar at Rappi? Like, is it around like lottery factor, like making sure that there's not one person that kind of holds everything? Or
of course, also we strongly know that but we believe in people rotation even inside Rappi across teams. So it does not make sense to have ownership on one person, since maybe it's working in another team in the next 3 months. And
that makes sense.
Better to be on one team.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations are kind of coming to realize that like the service or like the project is almost like the small atomic unit, and like the teams are a little bit more stable, but the services kind of move between teams as like the team shift around. Like the service is like the one thing that's like kind of survives past people and past teams, and that's the thing that gets transferred between ownership. And I think that has been like an interesting shift in the mindset when you think about like service reliability and quality. I think not just thinking about like, hey, is this team doing the right thing, but like looking at service reliability at actually a service level, and then bubbling it up to the teams and saying like, hey, which teams kind of need some additional resources to help support that reliability aspect as well. And yeah, kind of a good segue from there is like service reliability. I know, like Jonathan, you kind of touched on this a bunch, like around reliability being such a core part of like what ownership means. But what does reliability mean at Rappi? Like, is it just around like incidents? Is it around, like, are there different metrics and KPIs you're looking at? What does quality and reliability actually mean?
I think it's not about not having faults or incidents in the services, but having incidents in the most like controlled way, and to be able to handle the impact. So since like the beginning of the transition through monolith to microservices, we have a reliability plan that is like constantly working in parallel with the product backlogs, and we have several initiatives to try to accomplish that. I mean, how do you handle a failure on your dependencies, different fallback strategies, a lot of monitoring both in the technical indicators and the product indicators to see what is happening before our customer detects it. So I think like it's a huge amount of initiative and indicators, but the objective is the same, not affecting the production environment.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, like the fact that almost accepting that incidents will happen, but when they do happen, are you well equipped to deal with them? And I think that's an important thing around like service reliability is not looking at, hey, how many incidents did you have, or like, what are you doing, but are you doing something about that? Like, if you have a postmortem, are you following your action items? Or are you just opening tickets forever? Because I know that's a classic problem that all organizations have, where you open like 10 action items in a postmortem and then they just sit in your backlog forever. But are you actually doing something about that to improve the quality of service? And I think that's where service ownership comes in, because like if they're, like you said, if there's an action item from a postmortem, who's in charge of it? And like, should be the service owners, like they're accountable for that service. How about you, Mike? Like, what does service reliability and quality entail at equipment sharing, just in general?
I don't know if I could say anything better than how Jonathan put it. It's yeah, I'm just going to let his answer stand for itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. And obviously all of us having being working at startups, we know that there's always a trade-off between like the reliability aspect and like feature development and all this stuff. Was there like a specific moment or a time where reliability became a key focus area, where it's like, hey, we're gonna dedicate time and resources to really invest in reliability, and like even at the cost of maybe slowing down some of our feature development? Or was it kind of just like a natural progression as the company grew?
For us, it was moving from going after, we're in an industry that's underserved by technology traditionally, and like the heavy equipment industry, construction. And we made it really far on selling to mom and pop shops that are, mystified by Google Docs or, the internet in general. But then when we started to make our way from low market to mid market to up market, people started expecting SLAs, government regulations if you wanted to have to go after municipalities, things like that. So really it kind of grew out of, we were lucky that it grew out of the needs of the business and sales, as opposed to say, the rock polishing of like, well, we need to have 5 nines of uptime for this service that powers 3 customers.
Mhm.
You can chase the dragon of like availability and availability all you want, but we were lucky to have it kind of rooted in business need. And so that's where it came for us for the most part.
That's pretty cool. It's almost like reliability is like a business requirement as opposed to just being like an engineering afterthought. Yeah, Jonathan, for you guys, like as you guys saw like explosive growth over the past 5-6 years. Was it a similar like a business need for reliability? Was it more around like developer activity? Like where did that focus come? Like was there like a tipping point to just invest so much in reliability?
Yeah, I think it was some like the exponential growth of Rappi since like 4 years ago to the date. We started having like huge challenges for specific days like Mother's Day and that kind of day that the traffic becomes pretty big, and we started seeing some like bottlenecks and incidents and lack of visibility, and we started like building these huge reliability plans that we are working until today, and we are like every day like fine-tuning and seeing the results. But I think it's something that we are never gonna leave and something to live with every day.
Absolutely. Have you seen that like in having invested in reliability now, like has it made development better? Like I feel like there's almost an interesting thing where you over hump of like that initial effort into reliability, and then it almost starts to pay dividends where your engineers have more time to actually just focus on building things, and like they're not worrying about fighting fires a lot. Like, did you guys see that play out at Rappi and Equipment Share? Like, was there like immediate engineering value from investing in reliability as well?
Yes, of course, but taking care of reliability is also a time demanding task.
Yeah.
So we have both sides. The platform is more stable. We have a lot of less incidents, and when we have one, is the impact is so smaller than a couple of years ago. But we also have a lot of initiatives to raise the quality bar, and that is time consuming for the teams. So we are trying to handle the balance.
That makes sense. Is it similar at equipment share, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. As Jonathan said, that as you reduce the number of active incidents, your amount of time spent developing new features goes up, and it's such a hard. It seems it's so obvious to you, but like when you're working with business partners, that it's hard to make that explain that, like, trust me, this investment will pay off very quickly as it starts to snowball, where all of a sudden, instead of spending 15%, that 50% of our time we're spending a week firefighting, all of a sudden is going towards feature development and other technical investments that are more directly impacting and valuable to customers. Plus, there's all the intangible things of your brand isn't hurt, there's no fatigue on your engineers, so they're spending more time being happy and writing good code as opposed to being miserable and getting paged every 5 minutes. So it's almost a no-brainer to invest in reliability up front.
Makes sense. Yeah, and kind of like you both mentioned, like especially like finding that balance between reliability and feature development. I think you almost have to treat reliability as like a business outcome or a requirement that you are developing against. Like I think getting developers to understand like, hey, reliability is not just an afterthought, but it is something that we're actively trying to accomplish. And it is like one of the main goals that we have as an organization, both for our customers' sake and for our own developers' sake. Like I think that is extremely important. And I guess one of the things like around reliability is, we talk about it in very abstract terms, and every organization has like different meanings as to what reliability means. For some people, it's like your on-call metrics, like your MTTR and MTTA and like things like that. It's like that, those are the key things they're tracking. In other cases, it's like more holistic, incidents, postmortems, all that kind of stuff. What do you guys consider like service reliability? Like, is there certain metrics or KPIs you're looking at? Is it a more holistic thing? And it has that kind of changed over time as the business requirements have changed?
We started measuring quality and reliability indicators like the past year. We'll reach a point where we really need to measure, because before that there were obvious things to handle, but we started building some indicators, and we have a lot, and we are thinking about having a bunch more to expose the teams what they are doing best, what they are missing, which peoples are doing best, what I'm doing wrong. So we have several indicators, like as you mentioned, postmortem or bugs open or coverage, and I don't know, deployments data, like if successful deployment, rollback deployment. We had a lot of indicators, and we believe that as much as we have, the better idea of the maturity of the services and the teams we will have.
So it's kind of grown over time as you collect information about what different indicators can actually be, and what, they all tell you something different about that service quality.
We are trying also always to get feedback from the teams to get new indicators, because they have a pretty more clear visualization of how do we measure their health.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of at the front lines and facing the brunt of, like, as service owners, like we touched on, like they're the ones dealing with the outcomes, and so they know what best is like indicators of reliability. Yeah. Is a similar equipment share? Like, has that, like, what does reliability mean? Like, what goes into it today? And have those indicators grown? Like, are there indicators that you look at in particular?
Metrics and really kind of internal SLOs and things like that are something that's very new to us. We're experimenting with them now, where we're in such an aggressive rapid iteration phase that we started with a go live checklist that's like, make sure you have these things, these monitors set up, these anomaly detection, all this other stuff that we get from our monitoring solutions. And we found that we were iterating so rapidly that we'd quickly lose the value of the monitors, would quickly go away as we changed and did different things, and our architecture, our implementation changed. And so that we kind of recoiled from that. This, like, here are the cookie cutter metrics of MTTR, throughput, latency. Like they were so contextless. Like Jonathan was saying, is that they kind of didn't make a lot of sense. So we took a step back and said, teams show up with their own, what do you think is important for your service, right? Mm-hmm. So, and kind of going back to the context of impact of a service going down and ownership, right? Like same thing with like, it's not you can't just like lay out a blanket and say like, these are the things that all services should hold to, because you may have like a service that takes in, batch files, a service that takes in, is a webhook proxy or some other thing. There's like completely different access patterns and behavior. And so it really is contextual, but the things that hold true are, is it accessible to the customer that needs it? And then we do generally have, we do ask that you use anomaly detection that we get from, like, we use Datadog, right? So we try to make sure that you at least let Datadog capture all the things that you don't think about. Like, oh, you had a spike in your disk latency on this Kubernetes pod. Like, well, our engineers typically don't think about like disk latency and stuff like that, but Datadog says like, hey, this is highly correlated. So we say, at least give us like, a health check, give us surface your anomaly detection, and then like give us like 3 or 4 things that you think are important. So that's what we've our current stab at this is.
Got it. Yeah, I think like generally in a macro trend, we've kind of seen that shift from like, it was a free for all, like let microservice teams do whatever they want. And then it was a kind of a pendulum shift the other way. It was like, oh my God, we created chaos. Like, you're going to do the one way and this is the one right way. And I think we've kind of seen like a readjustment where it's like, hey, teams, we still want teams to have autonomy, but within like the golden path of like, hey, as long as you're doing these certain things and following some standards, like, you still have the autonomy to build the way you need to do, to track the things you need to do. I think service owners probably have like the most knowledge and context about what they're building, and I think autonomy has been particularly important. I guess like the longer term, or like the difficult question is, how do you get people to care about service quality? It's like developers are bombarded with requests on all kinds of things. They're being asked to build new features. There's support things coming in. There's postmortem action items. Your product manager's bugging you to do something. How do you get developers to care about service quality?
I think the most developers care about quality. The problem is, I think we had a very huge enemy, that is the urgency in the teams. So we have different like approaches. In the first place, we try to identify those teams like on fire all the time, and trying to help them in any way, like balancing the backlog between product and reliability, or I don't know if they need more people or whatever. And once they have time and backlog to focus on reliability, we don't have so much problems with those initiatives. And the other approach is, there's some things that we really need to happen in the short term, and we go through like enforcement, through deployment. I mean, we have tier 1 services, and we really need the coverage is 100% before going to production. So we create an initiative, and after the due date of the initiative, we have an enforcement deployment, and if the service does not have that coverage, it is unable to deploy. So we're trying to balance between best effort and enforcement. Got it.
And so it's like a mix between like gates and saying like, hey, you can't do this, but generally trying to like push them to do the right thing in some ways.
Yeah, that depends on the indicator that we are focusing. There are some indicators that we can be more flexible, because it's like a really nice to have, but there's some other indicators that we really need to raise right now because it's a risk for the platform.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, how about you, Mike? How have you gotten developers to care about service reliability and quality?
I think that the balance of I am the gatekeeper. I get to say what goes or doesn't go. I have that blessed authority, but I don't want it to be, I don't have to use it, right? So it is a big mixture of visibility, saying here are the expectations, here are the things we think are good, buy-in, making sure that the engineers and the teams developing can't even, they agree with at least the principles of what you're trying to do. And then the thing we've struggled with, the thing that we are working on is air cover, or what basically engineers want to do all this stuff, but they're being, to your point, that they're being bombarded with feature requests and all this other work. And when you explain to a service, like a product owner, like, well, I'm trying to, handle this edge case where my IAM credentials have expired or whatever, right? Like, they're like, well, that doesn't sound important. That's never going to happen. And it's like giving the air cover to say, like, a combination of, again, that enforcement, like, well, we expect this. So what your product owner thinks, no offense, is not, I don't particularly care. As well as, building up the goodwill, saying, like, we want you to also make good services, and we're going to do our darndest as leaders to say, make sure these teams get time to do this work, because it's important. It's not just, oh, I pushed out in like the happy path works for this new feature. It's robust, it's been exercised, it's automatically exercised, all these other things. And again, the visibility and making sure it's easy to track all this stuff is what, and that's where Cortex comes in, right? It's like, it makes it easy to say, like, it's an alignment on these things. We know it's up to par, at least, if not better. Because the moment you make, and we're going through this with metrics, where we're collecting metrics by hand for like workflows, stuff like that. The moment you make engineers or managers or anyone else do anything by hand, like, they're going to hate it. It's going to fall apart really fast. And so being able to do that automatically without building a bunch of bespoke stuff is quite nice.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it kind of sounds like this is the case, but it feels like there's an overlap between creating a culture of ownership and creating a culture of reliability. Like, those two things almost feel like there's some overlap. Like, if you have, a very strong ownership system where people care about like, they know they're accountable for their services, they almost naturally tend to care about the reliability of those services as well, because they own the entire life cycle. Is that true? Is that how you think about like ownership and reliability? Like, are those overlapping ideas? Or are those like completely separate? How do you think about that?
I think they're pretty close to one and the same. I've certainly never worked at a place that has, I would at least make the distinction. I think they get rolled up pretty frequently together.
Yeah.
Because I mean, no one wants to, the thing, like architects, like, no one wants to be handed a design and implement it, right? You want to be the one that designs and implements it. It's the same thing with service. You don't want to be, you don't want to have someone else develop a service and you're responsible for maintaining it. So I think they go hand in hand. If you built it, you see it cradle to grave.
Absolutely. Has it been important in your experience to kind of get like executive leadership buy-in in terms of reliability? Like, is that something that, engineers, like individual teams, are able to kind of advocate for? Or is there like almost a like global, hey, reliability is going to be something that we are going to focus on type of a requirement that needs to come down? Have you seen particular models work?
I think the thing that consistently is successful is rooting the need in the business, right? Like it's so contextual. When CodeShare is going through the early phases, like, we ship hot dog shit every day just because it's something we got out. Sorry for the curse on your nice recording.
Yeah, you
take it out in post. We were shoveling less than ideal code out all the time because it was iterating and getting something from the investors or whatever. And then again, as soon as like it became untenable to just ship code without any sort of approval or checks or doing, bare minimum, then yeah, it goes back to being rooted in that need. It's similar when a previous job, I worked at a place that lived and died by SEO and user conversion. And so because you got basically one shot in every like 8 years for this user interaction, right? And so you wanted to make sure the experience was crisp and nice. And so the company invested heavily in reliability because it was so important to get this once in every 8-year conversion. Whereas with equipment share, like it's very much a SaaS product. It's demo driven and B2B. So like the sales cycle is different. The reliability requirements are different. It's totally rooted in the business need, in my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think kind of showing that dollar value of like reliability is like a very easy way to make that case. And then, yeah, cool. I obviously, didn't want to spend all the time talking about Cortex, but we'd love to hear, in your guys' experience, has Cortex played a role in, creating that ownership and reliability culture and, driving some of these initiatives forward, and like how have you been using it so far?
The big thing ownership wise for us. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
The big thing for us that we found, we really enjoyed that GitOps model maps to our highly autonomous team model quite well. Our Kubernetes configuration is done through GitOps, or most of our infrastructure as code deployments are done through GitOps. And really the thing we found is if we meet developers where they are, is the best path to success of compliance, and not even compliance really, but like adherence to best practices.
Yeah,
right?
Adoption.
Yeah. Sure. The thing we found was that developers didn't want to go into a web GUI and click around to like register the service, but it's like, look, if we have this nice programmatically accessible piece of configuration, it lives right alongside your code, slap it in your merge request, it all updates. Like, and that was really key to us, is like making this really crisp integration, like iteration cycle for them, where that coupled with buy-in from leadership, to get back to your last question, is like we said, here's how easy it is to integrate. Look, leadership, here's how easy to get a lay of the land, see the experience. Like, and Cortex has been really good at merging those two things together for us, of giving some developers don't necessarily want to do or aren't excited about to do, but like a little bit of investment of one point card on their board or whatever, get it set up, keep it updated. It's all great. So it's been really helpful for us as an engineering organization that's going from 100 to hopefully several hundred engineers, to have a tool in place that is really engineering leadership focused around best practices and things like that. So it's been huge for us as a remote kind of decoupled organization.
That's really awesome to hear. And Jonathan, we'll kind of love to hear your experience as well. Like, I know you guys have been using the scorecards and the scoring mechanism pretty heavily. What has that been like, and what benefits have you seen from Cortex so far?
In our use case, I think the most valuable feature or gain that we have from Cortex is building like the foundations to a continuous reliability program. I mean, before Cortex, we didn't measure quality or reliability across our teams, and we didn't have a common way to manage the different initiatives that we have. So Cortex helps a lot with that, like creating that foundation to build initiatives on top and tracking indicators in a simple way and in a clear way, and also for exposing all the results to the developers, and so they can easily see what is the status in terms of reliability and quality of their services in a single point. I think that was great for us.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for that. And glad we've been able to be part of that journey of service maturity and ownership and excellence. But yeah, thank you both so much again for having this conversation and talking about ownership and reliability. It's top of mind for everyone, so I think everyone is going to really enjoy hearing how you guys have thought about that.